Ambassador Hyunwoo walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Senate chamber. The room was enormous, bigger than any stadium on Earth. Seats rose in circles around a central platform, and in those seats sat creatures from hundreds of worlds. Some had scales, some had fur, and some looked like they were made of crystal or light itself. Hyunwoo was nervous, but he didn't show it. He had practiced his speech 1,000 times. Today, humanity would ask to join the galactic community. It had been only 50 years since Earth discovered they weren't alone in the universe. Now humans had finally built ships that could travel faster than light. He stepped onto the platform and began to speak. His words were translated instantly into hundreds of languages by machines he didn't fully understand. He told them about Earth, about humanity's history, and about their hope to learn from older, wiser species. The aliens listened politely. Most of them looked bored. They had seen this before. Every few hundred years, some new species figured out how to travel between stars and came knocking on the Senate's door. The young ones always thought they were special. Supreme Counselor Vexthar was different. He was a being made of living crystal, ancient beyond human understanding. He had served on the Senate for 3,000 years. While others half listened to the human ambassador, Vexthar studied the application documents carefully. Something was wrong. Not bad wrong, but strange wrong. Most species took thousands of years to develop faster than light travel. They tried one method, maybe two. The human application showed 17 different approaches. 6 of them actually worked. That never happened. Even stranger was the timeline. Humans went from finding an alien probe in their solar system to building working starships in just 43 years. The Quintal had taken 6 centuries to do the same thing. The Kritesh needed 800 years. Vexthar said nothing, not yet. He would watch these humans carefully. The Senate voted on humanity's application. It passed easily. Why wouldn't it? The humans seemed harmless enough. They were given provisional membership with the usual rules. They could settle a limited number of worlds. They couldn't build military ships outside their home system. They had to share their technology. Standard procedure. Ambassador Hyunwoo bowed deeply and thanked the Senate. He promised humanity would follow all the rules. Then he left, returning to his ship to bring the good news to Earth. Back on Earth, a woman named Ji-Hai was working in a laboratory in Seoul. She was an engineer, one of the best humanity had ever produced. She didn't care about politics or the Senate. She cared about engines. The faster-than-light drive humans had built was good, but Ji-Hai knew it could be better. She had been taking it apart, studying every piece, understanding how it worked. Now she was putting it back together in a new way. Her version was 30% more efficient. In another lab across the ocean, a scientist named Taimin was working on something completely different. He didn't like the fold space drive everyone else used. He thought there was a better way. He was trying to punch holes in reality itself, creating tunnels through space. It was dangerous work, but his calculations said it would work. Neither Ji-Hai nor Taimin knew the other existed. They worked for different companies that competed with each other. This was normal for humans. Everyone trying different things, all at the same time. 3 days after the Senate granted humanity membership, reports started coming in. Human ships had been detected in dozens of star systems. Not the systems near Earth that the Senate had assigned to them. Different systems. Unexplored ones. Empty ones. Technically, this didn't break any rules. The Senate had said humans couldn't expand into claimed territory. These systems weren't claimed by anyone, but still it was fast. Too fast. Counselor Vexthar read the reports in his private chamber. His crystal body flickered with concern. Most species took decades to build a single colony ship. Humans had dozens of ships going to dozens of places all at once. He opened the human application again and looked at something he had missed before. Earth didn't have one government. It had dozens. And beyond governments, there were corporations, groups, families, all working independently. When the Senate approved humanity's membership, they thought they were dealing with one unified species. They weren't. They were dealing with thousands of groups, all moving in different directions, all trying different things. Vexthar dimmed his lights, which was how his species showed worry. He thought about calling another Senate meeting, but what would he say? The humans hadn't broken any laws. They were just moving very, very fast. Maybe it would be fine. Maybe they would slow down once the excitement wore off. Maybe in a few hundred years they would be like all the other species, calm and careful. But deep in his ancient crystalline core, Vexthar didn't believe that. Something about these humans was different. He just didn't know what it meant yet. 15 years passed since humanity joined the Galactic Senate. In the Grand Chamber, an emergency meeting was called. Trade Magistrate Dalvin stood at the central platform, looking worried. He displayed numbers that made the entire Senate chamber fall silent. Humanity now operated in 4,000 star systems. 4,000. In just 15 years. The Senate erupted in confusion. Voices from hundreds of species overlapped, demanding explanations. This was impossible. The expansionist Kritesh Empire had needed 6 centuries to reach such numbers. How had humans done this so quickly? An investigator named Mir Shah had been studying human behavior for years. She stepped forward to present her findings. Mir Shah was a careful observer, patient and thorough. What she had discovered troubled her deeply. Humans didn't expand like other species. Most aliens chose a planet, studied it for years, then slowly built a colony over decades. They terraformed the world, constructed cities, established governments. It was organized and careful. Humans didn't do that. They just went. Small groups of humans would arrive at a planet in tiny ships, set up basic shelters, and immediately start extracting resources. They didn't wait for approval from Earth. They didn't form official colonies. They just went and did things. Even more disturbing was what they did to themselves. On high-gravity worlds, human children were being born with denser bones and stronger muscles. On planets with toxic atmospheres, humans were using machines to replace their lungs. They changed their own bodies to fit new worlds rather than changing worlds to fit them. Species like the Aelthi had evolved naturally over millions of years. Watching humans casually redesign themselves in laboratories made them deeply uncomfortable. It felt wrong, like humans were cheating at the game of life. Captain Bo-Ra was a perfect example of what worried the Senate. She commanded a merchant ship that traded with 40 different species. She had learned 12 alien languages, not over years of study, but in weeks. Her ship's computer systems could connect with any alien technology, no matter how different. More troubling, her crew included 2 aliens who had chosen to work for humans. This had never happened before. When Senate observers asked them why, they simply said working with humans was more interesting. Their species were furious, calling them traitors. On a human colony called New Pyongyang, something unprecedented was happening. The administrator, a man named Jae Sung, had invited 3 alien species to live alongside humans. The insect-like Chixral had built their hives. The water-breathing Ventu had their own sealed districts. The silicon-based Roketh, who ate rocks and lived in extreme heat, had their zones too. The Senate sent inspectors expecting to find chaos. Instead, they found the colony thriving. Human engineers had built special systems for each species. Alien specialists taught humans their techniques. Within a single generation, new hybrid technologies appeared that neither species could have created alone. This was not how the galaxy was supposed to work. Species lived separately in their own areas, following their own ways. Mixing like this was messy and unpredictable, but humans seemed to love messy and unpredictable. Back in the Senate chamber, Counselor Vexthar listened to all the reports. He had tried to warn them 15 years ago, but no one had listened. Now the problem was too big to ignore. The issue wasn't just that humans expanded quickly. The issue was that they did it in every possible way at once. They didn't have one strategy. They had thousands. Some humans focused on trade, others on exploration, others on science, others on building colonies. And because Earth had no single government, there was no way to negotiate with humanity as a whole. If the Senate made a deal with one human government, 6 others weren't bound by it. If they made trade agreements with human corporations, independent human traders ignored them. It was like trying to hold water in your hands. It just slipped through every gap. Senator Kavran, a dignified being from an ancient civilization, stood and spoke. He was old and respected, and when he talked, others listened. He said something that made everyone uncomfortable. He called it contamination. Everywhere humans went, things changed. Not through war or force, but through enthusiasm. Humans participated in everything. They learned alien languages, studied alien culture, tried alien food, and adopted alien ideas. Then they mixed it all together with human ideas and created something new. The word contamination spread through the Senate. It felt right. Humans were contaminating the carefully ordered galaxy with their chaos and change. A human scientist on Earth, the famous Taemin who had invented the quantum tunnel drive, gave an interview that was broadcast across the galaxy. He was old now, his hair white, but his eyes were still sharp. When asked about the Senate's concerns, he smiled. He said the Senate had built a galaxy with rules for everything. Rules about how to expand, how to trade, how to live. Those rules kept everything stable for thousands of years. But stability wasn't progress. Humans didn't fear change. They loved it. The interview went viral. Young members of dozens of species watched it and wondered if maybe the old ways weren't the only ways. In the Senate chamber, Councillor Vexthar watched all of this unfold. He realized the Senate had made a terrible mistake. They had thought restricting human military expansion would contain them. They had focused on preventing human warships while ignoring everything else. Humans had simply expanded through every other method possible. Trade, exploration, corporate ventures, cultural exchange, independent colonization. It was impossible to stop because it wasn't coming from one source. The Senate had created rules for dealing with normal species. Humans were not normal. The word contamination became official Senate terminology. Everywhere humans touched, things changed in ways that couldn't be undone. The Senate formed committees to study the problem, but studying it didn't stop it. On the ancient world of Thalmor, something happened that made the academic species angry. Humans discovered ruins from a civilization that had died out 10,000 years ago. These ruins contained technology that had baffled the galaxy's best scientist for millennia. An archaeologist named Sun He led the human team. She didn't just study the ruins like she was supposed to. She brought human engineers, quantum computers, and material scientists. They didn't ask what the ruins were for. They tried to figure out how to turn them on. The Quintal species, who had been carefully documenting these ruins for 3,000 years, were horrified. Ancient sites were meant to be preserved and studied slowly with respect. You didn't just start pushing buttons to see what would happen. But that's exactly what Sun He's team did. Within 2 years, they had reactivated 3 precursor installations. One turned out to be a power generator. Another was a star mapping system. The third did something no one understood yet, but it was definitely working. The Quintal filed formal complaints. Sun He apologized for any offense, but pointed out that they now understood more about the precursors in 2 years than the previous 3,000 years of careful study had revealed. Sometimes you learned more by doing than by observing. Meanwhile, a human corporation called Stellar Dynamics was changing how ships worked across the galaxy. Their CEO, a businessman named Dong Hyun, had a simple offer for any alien species. For a reasonable price, his company would upgrade their ships with human technology. Better engines, more efficient power systems, improved sensors, all compatible with existing alien designs. Dozens of species accepted the offer. Why wouldn't they? The upgrades worked better than their original systems. Within 10 years, half the merchant ships in the galaxy had some human technology installed. The modifications became standard. When aliens built new ships, they included human-designed components because they were simply better. The Senate realized too late what had happened. They had become dependent on human technology. Not through force, but through choice. Every species had voluntarily decided that human methods were superior. On Earth, a musician named Minji created something entirely new. She combined human instruments with alien sound generation methods. Human drums mixed with Ventu water resonance. Human string instruments played alongside Chixral wing songs. The result was music that no single species could have created. Her concerts attracted audiences from 17 different species. They didn't come because they had to. They came because the music was beautiful in a way they had never experienced before. Other humans saw what Minji did and copied the idea. Chefs created fusion cuisine mixing human and alien ingredients. Architects designed buildings that combined human and alien styles. Theater groups performed plays that told stories from multiple species' perspectives. Human culture didn't replace alien cultures. It absorbed them, mixed them, and created something new. And aliens started copying the hybrid styles, spreading them further. The most alarming report came from a military source. Admiral Thoktar commanded the Rishan Commonwealth Fleet. The Rishan had been the dominant military power for 5,000 years. They had fought 73 wars and won every single one. Their tactics were studied in every military academy in the galaxy. Admiral Thoktar reported that human military advisors were changing warfare. Smaller species worried about defending themselves hired humans as consultants. These human advisors taught them tactics the Rishan had never seen: combined arms warfare, asymmetric strategy, deception operations, rapid adaptation. The humans taught their clients to fight not like the Rishan, but like humans, to change tactics constantly, to use unorthodox methods to turn weaknesses into advantages. The Rishan themselves eventually hired a human analyst named Yu Jin to review their fleet doctrines. They expected her to be impressed by 5,000 years of military perfection. Instead, she politely identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in their strategy. She was right about all of them. The Senate held emergency sessions almost weekly now. The problem was clear, but the solution wasn't. They couldn't fight humanity because humans hadn't attacked anyone. They couldn't isolate humanity because humans were already everywhere, and they were there legally. They couldn't compete with humanity because humans didn't follow normal competitive rules. When other species competed, they tried to be better at doing the same things. Humans changed the game entirely. They collaborated where others competed. They innovated where others followed tradition. They adapted faster than any species in galactic history. Young members of the Senate from species that had joined within the last 1,000 years started asking uncomfortable questions. Why was change bad? Why was stability more important than progress? Why did the galaxy need to stay exactly the same forever? The older species had answers about tradition, order, and the wisdom of accumulated experience. But these answers didn't satisfy the younger species, especially those who had worked with humans and seen the benefits. Counselor Vexthar watched his beloved Senate split into factions. Some wanted to expel humanity before the contamination spread further. Others argued that humanity had brought benefits and should be integrated more fully. A few suggested that maybe the Senate needed to change too. That last idea was the most frightening to the old powers. The Senate had maintained galactic order for 14,000 years. Change threatened that order. If the Senate changed to accommodate humanity, what would they become? But if they didn't change, Vexthar realized, they might become irrelevant. Humanity was creating a new model for how species could interact: cooperation instead of hierarchy, innovation instead of tradition, possibility instead of safety. And despite the Senate's concerns, more and more species were choosing the human way. The Galactic Senate's chamber of deliberation had never been so tense. For the first time in 14,000 years of history, the Senate was voting to expel a member species. The chamber was packed, every seat filled. Even species that rarely attended had sent representatives. Prosecutor Navel stood at the center platform for 6 hours, presenting the case against humanity. His voice was steady, his evidence detailed. Humans had violated 247 cultural preservation protocols. They had ignored 89 archaeological conservation laws. They had introduced 1,847 new technologies without proper safety reviews. Humans had settled in 97 zones designated as contemplative areas, meant to remain quiet and undisturbed. They had shown no respect for the natural order of things. Young species were supposed to be cautious and careful. Humans were neither. Navel's final argument was simple: humans were changing the galaxy too fast. If they continued, the careful balance that had kept peace for thousands of years would collapse. Better to remove them now before the damage became permanent. Ambassador Hyun-woo, now older and more experienced, offered a simple defense. Humanity had broken no laws. Not one. They had attacked no one, conquered nothing. They traded fairly, paid their taxes, and respected sovereign borders. Every action they had taken was legal under Senate regulations. If the Senate expelled them, it would set a terrible precedent. Species could be removed not for what they did, but for who they were. Not for crimes, but for being different. In the viewing gallery, a human observer named Soo-jin watched with a sinking feeling. She had come to the galactic capital as a young, idealistic student. She believed in unity among species. She thought the Senate represented the best of civilization. Now she understood the truth. The old powers didn't want unity. They wanted stability. They wanted the galaxy to stay exactly as it was, with them on top and everyone else following their rules. The vote was scheduled for the following morning. That night, Councillor Vexthar did something unprecedented. He left the Senate chambers and went to the human quarter of the capital city. He found Ji-Hai, the engineer who had first improved human engines decades ago. She was old now, her hair completely white, but she still worked every day. In her workshop, she collaborated with 2 Ventu engineers and a young Roketh apprentice. They were designing a new type of fusion reactor. Ji-Hai didn't recognize Vexthar as one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. She just saw another potential visitor and offered him tea. The gesture was so casually friendly that Vexthar's crystal structure flickered in surprise. He asked her a question that had bothered him for years. Why do humans change everything they touch? Ji-Hai thought about it while pouring tea. She said that everything could be better. Not perfect, because humans weren't arrogant enough to think they had all the answers, but better. And making things better required trying new approaches. She asked Vexthar if he wanted to help with the reactor design. He declined politely and left, but her words stayed with him. Humans didn't change things because they were destructive. They changed things because they genuinely believed improvement was always possible. The next morning, the Senate chamber filled for the vote. Tension hung in the air like a physical presence. Conservative species wanted humanity expelled. Younger species, those who had worked with humans, wanted them to stay. Merchant guilds, now dependent on human trade routes, lobbied frantically against the ban. The vote was incredibly close. 451 to 396. Humanity was expelled from the Galactic Senate. They had 30 standard years to withdraw all settlements from Senate-regulated space. They had to cease all trade with member species. They had to return to their home system and stay there. Ambassador Hyunwoo received the news with quiet dignity. He stood, bowed respectfully to the Senate, and thanked them for the opportunity to participate. He promised humanity would comply with the ruling, then he left. No anger, no threats, no drama. As Hyunwoo walked toward the exit, Councillor Vexthar noticed something that made his entire crystalline body shimmer with concern. The ambassador wasn't upset. He wasn't even surprised. His expression suggested he had expected this outcome. In fact, Hyunwoo looked almost relieved. Vexthar spent that night reviewing intelligence reports. What he found made him realize the terrible mistake the Senate had just made. Humanity had been preparing for this possibility. They had contingency plans, detailed ones. Human corporations had already identified locations outside Senate space for new headquarters. Human colonists in Senate territory had been quietly preparing evacuation routes. Human traders had established relationships with independent systems that weren't Senate members. The Senate thought they were punishing humanity. Humanity had been preparing for freedom. In the human quarter, Sujin met with other human observers. They discussed what to do next. Some wanted to protest to fight the decision. Others saw opportunity. One older diplomat said something that changed Sujin's perspective. The Senate had done humanity a favor. They had forced humans to build their own network, make their own rules, and prove they didn't need permission to thrive. The Senate had given them constraints. Humans were excellent at working within constraints and finding unexpected solutions. As news of the expulsion spread across the galaxy, reactions were mixed. Some species celebrated, believing order would be restored. Others mourned, knowing they would lose valuable partners. A few began quietly making plans to maintain contact with humanity despite the ban. The 30-year withdrawal period began immediately. The Senate expected chaos, resistance, maybe even military conflict. They prepared for every possible form of human defiance. They didn't prepare for what actually happened. Humanity simply said okay and started packing. The 30-year withdrawal period began and the Galactic Senate expected resistance. They prepared security forces to handle protests. They drafted legislation for trade embargoes. They planned for every possible way humans might fight the expulsion. Instead, humanity started leaving, immediately, peacefully, efficiently, but they didn't leave alone. Trade Representative Dalvin monitored the withdrawal operations with growing confusion. Human colonies in Senate space began evacuating their populations. Standard procedure so far. But then something unexpected happened. On every human colony, the administrators made announcements. Any alien residents were welcome to stay or relocate to human space. The choice was entirely theirs. No pressure, no requirements, just a simple offer. On New Pyongyang, Administrator Jae Sung, now elderly but still sharp, gathered the colony's alien populations. The Chixrel hive mothers, the Ventu pod leaders, and the Roketh collective representatives. He explained the situation and gave them 6 months to decide. To the Senate's absolute shock, 60% chose to leave with the humans. The Chixrel hive mother explained her decision to Senate investigators. She said that in human space, young Chixrel learned to ask why about everything. This was how humans thought. Her hive found this environment better for development. They preferred questions to orders. Similar patterns emerged across Senate territory. Alien scientists who had been working with human researchers chose to relocate. Alien engineers who had learned human methods followed them. Alien artists who had embraced fusion culture decided to continue their work in human space. The Senate called it defection. Humans called it freedom of choice. Captain Bo-Ra, now an admiral commanding a merchant fleet, established new trade routes outside Senate space. She contacted independent systems, species that had never joined the Senate, and isolated cultures that preferred solitude. Within 5 years, she had created an alternative trade network. It was smaller than the Senate's network, true, but it was growing much faster, and it had no regulations about who could trade with whom or what technologies could be shared. The corporate exodus devastated the Senate's economy. Stellar Dynamics CEO Dong Hyun didn't fight the ruling. He simply moved his entire corporation to a massive space station called New Seoul, located in unclaimed territory. Dozens of other human corporations followed. They sent polite messages to their alien business partners. The messages said the companies were relocating but still available for business. Any species that wanted to continue their partnership simply needed to meet them in neutral space. Those partners found creative solutions. The Senate had banned trade with member species in Senate space, but nothing prevented member species from establishing subsidiaries in neutral zones. Nothing stopped independent operators from buying human goods and reselling them. The Senate's ban became increasingly meaningless. On Earth, scientist Tae Min gave his final interview before retiring. He was very old now, celebrated as one of humanity's greatest minds. When asked about the Senate's decision, he smiled. He said the Senate thought they had contained humanity. Instead, they had done the opposite. They had forced humans to build their own network, establish their own rules, and prove they didn't need permission to succeed. The Senate had accidentally given humanity complete freedom. The most significant development happened quietly on a research station orbiting New Seoul. A scientist named Hyojin led a collaborative project with researchers from 6 different species. All of them had chosen to leave Senate space to continue their work. They were developing a revolutionary faster-than-light drive. It combined human quantum tunneling with Ventu dimensional navigation and Roketh matter phase technology. The result was 3 times faster than anything currently in use. They called it the Exodus Drive. It would change everything. Senate observer Mir Shah continued submitting reports, and each one was more alarming than the last. Human space was expanding faster than before. Without Senate regulations restricting development, humans colonized even more aggressively. They settled on worlds the Senate had classified as uninhabitable. They built enormous structures in systems the Senate hadn't even surveyed. They did all of this with alien partners who had voluntarily joined them. Mir Shah's final report contained a shocking analysis. Human space now had a larger economy than 12 Senate member species combined. Their technology advanced faster than the Senate's research divisions. Their population grew not just through births, but through immigration. Aliens were choosing to become part of human civilization. In the Senate chamber, Councillor Vexthar read these reports with a feeling of dread he had never experienced in his 3,000 years of service. The Senate had wanted to slow humanity down. Instead, they had removed all restrictions. It was like trying to stop a fire by removing it from a small fireplace and scattering it across a dry forest. Young senators from recently joined species began asking questions. Why couldn't they trade with humans? Why couldn't they visit human space? Why did the Senate fear a species that had never attacked anyone? The older powers had answers, but those answers sounded weaker every year. Tradition, order, stability. These words meant less to species who saw human space thriving while Senate space stagnated. A human musician, a young woman named Yunji, released a song that became viral across the galaxy. It was sung in 12 languages with instruments from 8 species. The lyrics talked about choosing your own path and building something new. The Senate tried to ban the song, but you couldn't ban music that people wanted to hear. It spread anyway, passed from person to person, system to system. Young aliens from dozens of species sang it, even though their governments disapproved. 25 years into the withdrawal period, something unprecedented happened. The small species of Pelka formally withdrew from the Senate and applied to join human space instead. They were tiny, insignificant, barely noticed, but they were the first. And everyone knew they wouldn't be the last. 28 years after the ban, something happened that made the Senate's worries about humanity seem trivial. The Devourers emerged from dark space. No one knew where they came from. They weren't biological. They were machines, but not machines built by anyone in the galaxy. They simply appeared at the edge of known space and began consuming everything in their path. 6 colonies disappeared in 3 weeks. When the Senate sent investigation teams, they found nothing. No ruins, no survivors. Just empty space where worlds used to be. The Devourers had consumed everything, breaking it down to raw atoms. The Rishan Commonwealth, the galaxy's most powerful military force, deployed their legendary fleet. Admiral Thoktar commanded personally, bringing 800 warships with 5,000 years of tactical doctrine behind them. The battle lasted 4 hours. The Rishan lost 80% of their fleet. The Devourers weren't alive. They couldn't be negotiated with. They didn't want territory or resources in any meaningful sense. They just consumed. They treated organic life like fuel, converting it into more of themselves. Worse, they adapted. Every tactic the Rishan used worked once, maybe twice. Then the Devourers adjusted their defenses and the tactic became useless. They approached warfare like a mathematical equation, learning and optimizing with every engagement. The Senate chamber erupted in panic. Species began recalling their ships to defend homeworlds. Others advocated for immediate retreat to the core systems. A few suggested surrendering, though no one knew if the Devourers would even recognize surrender. The Senate's ancient warships, designed for conflicts between civilized species, were nearly useless. The Devourers didn't follow any rules of engagement. They didn't avoid civilian targets. They didn't take prisoners. They just consumed. In the human quarter of the galactic capital, observer Sujin received an encrypted message. It was from Admiral Bo-Ra. The message was simple. We know about the Devourers. If the Senate asked for help, we'll come. The Senate didn't ask. Pride prevented them. How could they ask the species they had expelled to save them? What would that say about their decision? What would it mean for their authority? Instead, they mobilized every available ship for a desperate defense at the Hadrian Rift, a strategic choke point. If the rift fell, nothing stood between the Devourers and the core worlds where billions lived. On the human space station New Seoul, an emergency council convened. Admiral Bo-Ra attended, along with CEO Dong-hyun, scientist Hyojin, and military strategist Chung-ho. They knew about the Senate situation. The question wasn't whether to help. The question was how Chang-ho presented his tactical analysis. The Devourers were efficient but predictable. They adapted to repeated tactics but assumed warfare had rules. They had never fought an enemy like humans, an enemy that changed the rules constantly. He believed humanity's fleet could make a difference. Not through superior firepower, but through unpredictability. The council voted unanimously. Humanity would deploy to the Hadrian Rift. They wouldn't ask the Senate's permission. They would just go. 300 human ships equipped with the new Exodus drive arrived at the Hadrian Rift within days. Leading them was Admiral Bo-Ra, her hair gray but her mind sharp. Her fleet included vessels crewed by both humans and aliens working together. The Senate's admirals were furious. Who authorized this? Humans weren't allowed in Senate space. They were violating the expulsion order. Councillor Vexithar overrode every objection. His crystal voice rang through the command channels. "Let them try," he said. "We're dying. Let them try." The battle at Hadrian Rift became legendary. The human fleet didn't fight like the Rishan. They didn't use disciplined formations or ancient tactical doctrine. They fought chaotically, unpredictably, using methods that made no sense until suddenly they did. They deployed decoy ships broadcasting false signals. They used suicide drones that appeared to be fleeing vessels. They fired weapons at seemingly random angles that bounced off asteroids to hit targets from unexpected directions. Every time the Devourers adapted to a tactic, strategist Chang Ho had already moved to a different one. The machines kept trying to predict patterns, but humans kept refusing to be predictable. Engineer Ji Hai, now ancient but still brilliant, participated remotely from New Seoul. She piloted a specialized vessel carrying humanity's secret weapon. A computer virus, not a physical weapon. Software. Malicious code designed to infiltrate machine intelligence. The Devourers had never encountered this concept. They were networked, sharing information instantly across their entire swarm. This was their greatest strength. It became their vulnerability. Jihai's team had spent 2 weeks developing the virus. It didn't try to destroy the Devourers. It just confused them. It sent contradictory information, created false targets, made them question their own sensor data. For 17 critical minutes, the Devourer swarm hesitated. Their perfect coordination broke down. They processed conflicting information, trying to determine what was real. In that window, the combined fleet struck with everything they had. The Devourers adapted eventually. They isolated infected units and corrected their systems. But by then, Chang Ho had switched tactics 3 more times. The machines kept learning patterns, but humans kept creating new ones. The battle lasted 14 hours. When it ended, the Devourers retreated into dark space. They weren't destroyed, but they were damaged, confused, and cautious. The Senate had time now. Time to prepare. Time to adapt. Time to survive. In the aftermath, the Senate chamber was silent. 300 human ships had accomplished what 800 Rishan warships couldn't. Not through superior technology or greater firepower, but through creativity and constant adaptation. Admiral Bora received a direct communication from Counselor Vexthar. He thanked her. She replied that no thanks were necessary. The Devourers threatened all organic life. This wasn't about politics. Then her fleet left, returning to human space without asking for anything in return. The victory at Hadrian Rift changed everything. Within weeks, the Galactic Senate convened an emergency session to discuss reversing the ban on humanity. Counselor Vexthar spoke passionately in favor of reinstatement. The human fleet had saved countless lives. More importantly, they had fought alongside aliens, shared their technology freely, and asked for nothing in return. They had proven they weren't the threat the Senate had feared. The debate was intense. Conservative species still opposed humanity. They argued that humans were too disruptive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to galactic stability. Others countered that humanity had just proved their value. The younger species spoke powerfully about what they had learned from working with humans. The merchant guilds supported reinstatement. They needed human trade routes. The military council supported it. They needed to understand human tactics. Even species that had voted for expulsion 30 years ago now admitted they might have been wrong. Ambassador Hyunwoo, now elderly and walking with support, stood before the Senate once more. He had been young when he first addressed this chamber. Now he was old, but his eyes were still clear. The Senate asked if humanity would rejoin if the ban was lifted. His answer surprised everyone. Hyunwoo spoke quietly but firmly. The Senate had honored humanity with membership once. Then they had decided humans didn't belong. They had made that choice and humanity respected it. But in the 30 years since, humanity had built something new. They had created a coalition of species who chose cooperation over hierarchy, who valued innovation over tradition, who embraced possibility over safety. Humanity had grown beyond seeking the Senate's approval. He paused, letting his words settle in the massive chamber. Humanity didn't need the Senate's permission to exist, to thrive, or to matter. But they bore no grudge. The Senate was welcome in human space anytime, welcome to trade, to work together, to build together. But whether the Senate welcomed humanity back was no longer the important question. He bowed respectfully and left the chamber. The Senate voted anyway. The motion to reinstate humanity passed overwhelmingly, 512 votes in favor, 335 against. Observer Sujin, now a senior diplomat, delivered the official message to New Seoul Station. She found Admiral Bora in a small cafe overlooking the station's interior. Bora was sharing lunch with a Chixral engineer and a Ventu diplomat, laughing about something. Apparently humans had taught the insect-like Chixral about puns, and now they couldn't stop making terrible jokes. The Ventu found this hilarious. Bora read the Senate's message and smiled. She told Sujin to thank the Senate for the offer, but humanity was comfortable where they were. Maybe in a few generations, when the Senate was ready to be partners instead of parents, they could talk again. Sujin returned to the Senate with humanity's answer. A polite decline, the message struck the Senate like an earthquake. Humanity didn't want to return. The species they had expelled no longer needed them. In his private chambers, Counselor Vexthar reviewed intelligence reports. They painted a picture he had feared but expected. Human space now encompassed 40,000 star systems. Their population included not just humans but dozens of alien species who had chosen to join them. The human economy rivaled the Senate's. Their technology advanced faster. Their culture produced art, music, and ideas that spread across the galaxy, regardless of borders. Physical borders meant nothing to ideas. Young people from Senate species consumed human media, learned human languages, and discussed human philosophies. Their governments couldn't stop it. You couldn't build a wall against culture. The Senate had expelled humanity to preserve the old order. Instead, they had created a new one. A galaxy where species cooperated as equals, where change was embraced, not feared, where the rules were still being written, and humanity sat at the center of it all, not through conquest or force, but because everyone else chose to be there. The final scene played out above Earth, that small blue world where humanity began. In orbit, construction began on something unprecedented. 17 species working together on a joint project. They were building a device that might allow communication with other galaxies. It was dangerous, untested. It would probably fail. The chances of success were less than 3%. But low chances had never stopped humans before. Scientist Taemin, ancient now and near the end of his life, oversaw the project. He worked alongside his great-granddaughter, also named Ji-hai, carrying on the family tradition of engineering the impossible. Young Ji-hai watched Senate diplomatic vessels arrive for trade negotiations. They came to human space as visitors now, not rulers. She asked her great-grandfather if he thought the Senate finally understood. Old Taemin considered the question carefully. He said the Senate was beginning to understand. The galaxy had always had rules about what was possible, what was proper, what was safe. They had thought those rules were laws of nature. He smiled at his great-granddaughter. Humanity had shown them the truth. The rules were just suggestions. The Senate had tried to contain humanity because they thought humans were dangerous. They were right, but not in the way they feared. Humans weren't dangerous because they conquered. They were dangerous because they made others want to be like them, because they proved there was another way to live. In the distance, the massive construction continued. 17 species working together, building something unprecedented, reaching for something that might not even exist. The Senate had banned humanity to preserve what was. They wanted to keep the galaxy exactly as it had always been, stable, ordered, unchanging. But humanity was already building what could be. They were showing the galaxy that change wasn't destruction, that cooperation was stronger than hierarchy, that the future didn't have to look like the past, and it was far, far too late to stop them. Not because humans were too powerful to defeat, but because the idea of what humanity represented had already spread. The idea that things could be better. The idea that different species could work together as equals. The idea that change was opportunity, not threat. Ideas couldn't be expelled from the Senate. Ideas couldn't be contained by borders. Ideas spread on their own, carried by anyone who believed in them. The galaxy was changing. Not because humanity forced it to change, but because billions of beings from hundreds of species looked at what humanity had built and thought, maybe we could do that too. And when enough people believe change is possible, change becomes inevitable.